trade love fest that we're having here today. This is a refreshing development, and I appreciate all the witnesses being here. So just a few questions. I'm particularly interested in AGOA and what's happening in Africa. Senator Crapo talked a little bit about the geopolitical impacts in Africa. And Ms. Lisa, I note that with the coups that are occurring in Africa, that the void is being filled, it seems like, by Russia and China across the board. Hardly democracies, hardly people sharing our values. And can you just talk to me a little bit more about the need, in terms of the geopolitics of Africa, filling the void that China and Russia would otherwise fill if we don't, by reauthorizing things like AGOA?
Thank you, Senator. I think that the U.S. has a great opportunity to enhance its relationship with the Africans and our economic partnership with them, recognizing that there are other actors in the world, Russia, China, that are very active on the continent, but they're not the only ones. Even our European partners and competitors are in Africa. The Brazilians are there, the Indians are there, et cetera. So the U.S. really does need to step up its engagement, and there are a number of ways we can do that through tools we have, Prosper Africa, the U.S. Export-Import Bank, DFC, et cetera, providing support to U.S. companies to actually sell their products to Africans who then use it to manufacture and send here. I recognize, though, also that there is a concern about some of the backtracking on democracy and rule of law that we've seen, particularly in West Africa, but we hope that it doesn't impact the narrative that Africa as a whole, 54 countries, it's not one country, 54 countries, there are many opportunities for the U.S. to engage there. And for those countries in West Africa, as I said, there have been some coups, some backtracking, Gabon, Niger, Burkina Faso, unfortunately. But I think to keep the pressure on them, basically to come back into the good practices of rule of law, political pluralism. These are things that are really important and sets an environment in those countries for trade and investment. That's what we tell them. You're doing this for other reasons, but you have to realize that this has an impact on the environment in your country, and our companies are not going to want to invest here. Those who are there may consider leaving or do leave, so you do need to get back on track. And some of them have, and as I said, over the years, you'll see that some of them fall out of the fold and then come back into the fold.
Well, we certainly can't promote our values if we're not there, which is what happens now, and that, as I pointed out, the void seems to be filled by those with other motives and very different values than we have. Senator Carper and I have joined together on a number of op-eds and a number of hearings about the opportunity we missed to take up the Trans-Pacific Partnership in particular. It was, in my view, a major mistake, and I blame Republicans and Democrats alike, but the fact of the matter is China is more than happy to fill that void, and we know what a negative influence they're having in terms of threatening their neighbors. Ms. Gill talked about the Philippines, comes to mind, but other countries in the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea that are being threatened, not the least of which is Taiwan now. And if we were more engaged in setting the standards with our friends and allies in the region, I think that would have a very positive influence. I remember a quote somewhere that I read that it goes basically along these lines. It says, make trade, not war. And there are economists and others, Mr. Lincomb, who argue that if you're trading with countries, you're less likely to engage in military conflict. Is there any truth to that?
Yes, definitely, Senator. Thank you. I wrote a paper a couple of years ago. I'm happy to provide it for the record, detailing the economics literature that shows repeatedly that countries that trade together tend to have less armed conflict between each other. Now, it's certainly not perfect. Russia and Ukraine have taught us that there are exceptions to that rule. But you're talking about a substantial decrease in the likelihood of cross-border armed conflict because of increased economic engagement. When you couple that with the fact that has already been mentioned, that countries like China and Russia are not simply sitting still, they're engaging in places like Africa and Southeast Asia. It's really critical that the United States get back into the game on trade policy, unlike what's been going on for the last few years.
Well, it may be too late with the current administration in terms of trade policy, but I think this is something that obviously there's strong bipartisan support for, and I think we need to pursue these arguments for the reasons that all of you have testified to. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. I would just only add one point. Obviously, TPP was a debacle. One of the areas that I'm proud of for this committee is we came back pretty quickly with the U.S., Canada, Mexico agreement.
Agreed.
We got to the key questions. You know, business wanted access to markets and to exports. We supported that. And a lot of working families said there's got to be a better job on the labor and enforcement issues. And so